This is your friendly neighborhood dragon, and welcome to another edition of another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast that streams live on Substack every morning, or at every morning. Used to do it that way, every Monday morning at 8 a.m. And this is an opportunity for us to meet together live, win the morning so we can win the day and therefore the week, and interact on any level on the topic that we are going to present. So I want to welcome everybody as you start filing in. One of my favorite social media platforms, Substack, because the quality of people that I'm meeting here is just extraordinary. People that are actually having interesting things to say, and people that think and contemplate. I love it. So welcome as people start to file in. So feel free to say hi when you come in. This is our opportunity as we're in the podcast studio and we're recording this episode, but this is our opportunity to speak to one another. So sometimes you'll notice that I will share some of the cool insights that we make in these live episodes on the actual podcast to the large group. So feel free to chime in and share your thoughts and distinctions. And as always, I always welcome positive feedback and negative feedback, which will lead perfectly into this topic today on flow burglars. So welcome, everybody. And I just want to give a couple of shout outs to some things that are coming up. I leave on Friday. So this live recording right now is being done on Monday, the 17th of November. And it's crazy how fast it came up, but I'm leaving on Friday night, overnight. I'm flying to Peru, over to Cusco, Peru. And I'll be embarking on a interesting spiritual journey that the dragon likes to do ever so often, once or twice a year. But I'll be staying at this just miraculous place right by a river in what's called the Sacred Valley, and basically looking up at the mountains where Machu Picchu exists. So I'll be leaving Friday night. So I don't know if I will be able to meet with you on Monday next week. Who knows? Maybe I'll stream live from Cusco. I don't know how that will work, but in any case, very excited about that. And then when I get back, I'll have a week to prepare because then I'm heading out to San Diego. So anybody that's on the West Coast or anybody that is inclined to go to what I think is shaping up as one of the most powerful events that I will ever partake in. But I'm going to be emceeing a very large event in San Diego for my good friend Jim Quick, and his event is called Limitless Live. So if you go to limitlesslive.com and just look at the speakers that he has coming in, it's extraordinary. You know, I speak very often about this jacuzzi experience that people have, where we get in this awesome, jacuzzi-like state of knowing and learning. And one of my favorite quotes and acknowledgments is that, remember, learning and knowing is just another form of distraction in the absence of action. But at this particular event, which is December 8th, limitlesslive.com, this is going to be a big game shifter. So if you're in the area and you're interested in coming out to that event, there's about 1,000 seats in the audience live, and then he's soon to announce there's going to be a stream as well. So you guys know that before anybody else. I might actually have Jim live in a Substack interview this week, but that is going to be an extraordinary event that will shift you, and it's an honor and a privilege for me to be there. So go to limitlesslive.com, and if you go there, you'll notice that he's got two packages. He's got the normal human package, and then he's got some sort of a VIP package. But if you use the code DRAGON30, you'll get 30% off of whatever you see in there. So hope to see you guys there. So great morning. Great morning, Kathy. Great week to you, Kathy, coming up. Great morning to Tango Pigeon, my mother. Great morning, Stephen. Once again, feel free to comment and say hello. We're live right now, and this will go into post edit for the podcast. But if you want to have any sort of interaction, ask questions, make any sort of insights, once again, that information, if it's got great context and it's directly connected to the topic, we'll make it on the show and we'll give you a shout out. Stephen says, "Morning, health and wealth." Yes. On a healthy body rests a healthy mind. And yeah, how could you expect to go after wealth without your health? Great point. Great point, Stephen. All right. So welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. So today, as I said, we're going to be diving into what I call one of the most unintentionally spiritual roles that a person can play in your life, so somebody else can play in your life, and that is the role of what I call the flow burglar. And this is something that is going to be in my book that's launching in February. That book is called Make Sense. That book is finished and just crazy, 8 years of work for that. But I've already started to write my second book. So this is going to be an excerpt from my second book. And I do a whole chapter on this idea of the flow burglar. So we tease it a little bit in the first book. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is just one of the most unintentionally spiritual roles that a person can play in your life. As if you looked at your life as a game and there's characters in the game, you're the main character. And that is the role of the flow burglar. And I'll let you know what those are. So these are the people. Tell me if you can resonate with these. Great morning, Lindsay. So these are the people who seem in your life perfectly timed to test your patience, right? To shake your confidence and maybe even considered people that can hijack your peace. And that's not because they're evil, by the way. We're going to entertain that today, but because they're unknowingly exposing the places inside of you that are still giving, or I'm sorry, they're unknowingly exposing the places and spaces inside of you where you're still giving your power away. So that's going to be one of the reframes today. Is basically the people that come into your life that seem to be a pain in the ass and really giving you shit and just entertaining. Maybe they're there for you and maybe it's not happening to you. And maybe what they're doing is exposing the areas in your life where you're giving your power away still. So it's opportunistic. So in this episode, we're going to basically decode what a flow burglar is, what they really are, and how to spot them. You got to know when you're dealing with a flow burglar because they are very, very cloaky. How they operate and why they trigger you so deeply. That's a big, big distinction, is to ask yourself, why is this thing, this event, this thought in my head triggering me so deeply? And also how, with one quiet and curious, just like it says on my hat, which stands for haven't made up my mind yet, it's a pause, with one quiet and curious, that flow burglar, that person, can become one of the greatest teachers that you never asked for, but absolutely needed. Are you ready for this? Great morning, Bear Sage. I love when people say GR8. Great morning, Bobby has joined us. So feel free to pay this forward. Highest form of self-actualization. When you learn something, if you want to keep it, give it away. So honor other people with something that you find valuable in this conversation or even these Monday mornings. Give it away. That's the way it's going to stay. And then you'll enrich somebody else's life. And like I said, that's the highest form of self-actualization. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story. I was trying to figure out when I first came up with the idea of flow burglars because I've been having them in my life forever. I just never noticed what they were. So I met my first real flow burglar. And think about the flow burglars in your life, and also consider the fact that you might be one. Isn't that interesting? Great morning, Dimitri. Once again, is that my Dimitri from the ceremonies and stuff? So I met my first real flow burglar long before I even had a name for them. So back then, I just used to call these people, like this particular person, that guy, that pain in my ass, and the type whose presence, when they walk in a room And when they interact with you, their presence basically shifts the air in that room like a cold draft. You know what it feels like to feel a cold draft. So we were in some sort of important, almost high stakes meeting. And it was a meeting and a table that I was sitting at that I had worked very, very hard to be in, right? So I was emotionally excited about being in that conversation. And it was my turn to speak. And I was in flow. I was locked in, laser focused, feeling clear and dialed in, like the dragon was in flight and alive at that moment. I was in flow. You know what it feels like. And then he spoke, that guy, and he didn't speak to add anything meaningful. This is what's interesting, and this is one of the parts of spotting them. He actually spoke, and it seemed like he was there to destabilize me as a human, right? The context of what he said had nothing to do with where we were going with the conversation. He was trying to destabilize and throw me off. So he basically attacked, or this is my perception, he attacked my motives instead of my ideas. Think about that. He wasn't it wasn't like healthy criticism. He was going after my motives for what I was saying. So my motives rather than my ideas, and he was attacking my character instead of my reasoning that I was sharing, which I was very excited about. And he did it with kind of like a smirk little grin. He was enjoying himself. He was happy to do it. And that grin kind of should have come with like a warning label. You know what I'm saying? So, and just like that, all he did was what he did. And just like that, my entire state collapsed, which is not an easy thing to do because I was very confident and I was very certain in what I was saying and I was in flow, but my entire state collapsed. And what did it feel like? Heat, tightness. I became tunnel visioned. All of that stuff ensued. And I was no longer leading the room nor myself. I moved into a victim status and I was reacting to one man's insecurity and accepted his insecurity as my own. Does that make sense? You feel that? So my nervous system, it's kind of like my nervous system folded in that instant on itself, like some sort of cheap furniture. Isn't that fascinating? So I walked out of that meeting furious. My stress response system, my protective force field had been infiltrated and I walked out furious. And I wasn't furious only at him. If I'm really being honest, I was also furious at myself. I was upset with myself. How did I let one human's emotional turbulence hijack my entire internal world? Here's an interesting way of looking at that. I questioned, how did I let his storm, because that's what he presented, how did I let his storm evolve and become my internal weather? Isn't that an interesting way to look at it? Somebody else's storm that they present you with, sometimes we allow that to manifest as weather inside of our own minds. He didn't steal my flow, right? I made a distinction that night. I remember I was so angry and I was just, that's another thing about flow burglars is they occupy like your whole day, right? So that night, that night replaying that moment over and over and over, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build an airplane in the sky. We're trying to teach a goldfish to climb a tree. It's impossible. But I just kept replaying that moment like some sort of courtroom evidence that I was looking over, and something all of a sudden clicked. And this is where this concept was born. Once again, these will be in my books. So he didn't steal my flow. I realized that. I handed it to him. So I realized that I played as big a role or maybe even bigger in this unsettling feeling that I was feeling. He wasn't the villain. He was just a messenger. And I started to get curious about it. So that realized or that situation, that realization, what happened is it changed everything. That's what I'm here to share with you today. It's just a reframe. It's a different way of looking at things. Remember, if you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at will begin to change. So when I had that realization, all I did was I got curious and I uttered this curious, huh. That's the sound. When you acknowledge something, you're not sure about it, but you're going to allow yourself the space to maybe use some rationale and some logic and think about it. So when I said, I didn't utter that curiosity directed towards him, but at myself and the whole situation. I was looking at why it affected me so deeply and what else could be true about it. That's one of my favorite questions when I'm in the midst of an interface that's feeling unsettling and it's not serving me, is to say, what else might be true, Dragon? So that's when the term flow burglars was born. That's it. I made it up. I'd never heard of it before. Flow burglars. He was trying to burglarize my flow, but I'm in a different space now and I'm ready to reframe it because I'm thinking about it rather than allowing the world to think for me or my conditioned program mind. And here's the twist. There's always a twist, right? After I made that huge distinction, it wasn't the last time that I saw that guy, right? But I'm looking at him differently. I've changed the way I look at him now. After that day, he didn't stop being who he was. But what changed was that he no longer had access and power and dominion over my inner world. And the best way that I could describe it is he was still throwing punches, but his punches felt like they were now being thrown at me underwater, if you can visualize that. I'm thinking of a movie where Jean-Claude Van Damme was training. I think it was Bloodsport or something like that. He was throwing punches at me still, because that's what he does, but they were thrown underwater and no longer, because of the time that I had to look at it and think about it, no longer reaching my jaw. So I came to realize that flow burglars, they don't actually show up. This was a big distinction. They don't show up to disrupt your life. That is you that does that, allows that. They actually show up to reveal the parts of your life that are still disruptible. Does that make sense? So think about it. I started to look at movies and heroes' journeys and all of that stuff, right? They all have flow burglars, right? Batman had the Joker. So here's my Joker. I love the word Joker, by the way. I love to say, oh, that guy's just a Joker. And what I'm referring to is Batman's Joker. Luke Skywalker, who did he have? Darth Vader. And even in the famous movie Matrix, Neo had Mr. Smith. So this was not necessarily a bad thing. I started to question how this might be a good thing. So I made a decision that we get flow burglars and they come to us as opportunities. That's the reframe. They're not detours, they're opportunities. But to the unconscious sleepwalker, and those of you that have been coming along this journey with me, or those of you from the Make Sense Academy, or the people that I coach, all we're doing is awakening people and giving them the keys of control and power to think for themselves in a world that is thinking for us. If you're involved in some sort of algorithm or consuming things that are making you assume things. So to the others, the unconscious sleepwalkers, they appear to be malicious flow burglars, disrespectful, and also highly inconvenient, don't they? And that's the first time you notice a flow burglar, you're feeling disrespected. You're feeling like they have malicious intent and that it's highly inconvenient. That's the victim status. If you're feeling that something is happening to you and it's inconvenient, you're in some sort of a defensive victim status where you're perceiving that something's happening to you, and you're not asking how it's happening for you or how it might serve you. But to the awakened ones, to you guys, when you practice open curiosity, which is just an awareness, say, I wonder, maybe. When you practice open curiosity rather than just reactivity, the way that we're wired right now, so you'd have to be able to notice it, you start seeing flow burglars for what they really are. And what are they? I like to look at them as uninvited teachers, but welcomed. Uninvited teachers, and they're kind of like unwilling spiritual trainers, right? They're unwillingly giving you training that you didn't ask for. But isn't that the way that the universe works? Have you ever had the universe give you something that you didn't ask for, but it ended up serving your needs to a high, high level? So let's look at some. Bobby says, networking on a molecular level. Also, the Joker voice in the cartoon. Yeah, exactly. I love that. Great morning, David Thomas. Good to see everybody. So once again, we're live right now. We're going to have the recorded version for the podcast. But if you guys have any deep insights, and I know you Substackers do, please feel free to jump into the arena of play right now and add to this conversation, and you'll make it on the podcast. So uninvited teachers and they're your unwilling spiritual leaders. A flow burglar can actually be a coworker, a partner, maybe even these days a stranger online, or even you, meaning your own thoughts that are in your head that say things like you're not enough. And their job is simple. Their job is simple, to test whether your peace is internal or requires outsourcing. Does your peace sit in the, delicately sit in the balance of outside sources? Do you require outside things to be right in order for you to feel whole and feel peaceful and happiness and experience a wonderful life? We spoke last week about what it means to walk alone and not need anything to be happy and whole. So their job is simple, and that is to test your peace and see if it's internal or outsourced. And we love outsourcing, don't we? Think about that for a second. We love outsourcing our peace through the practice of things like blame. How many times do you blame others for your circumstance? And we say things like, it's not me, it's them. It's the situation. Oh, well, it's just life. I find that so interesting when we say it's just life. Shit happens, right? I understand the value in that. But while shit is happening and while life is happening, we have control over what? How we respond and how we perceive it. That's the essence of all my work. But that precious pause, that's how you're armed. That's your magical tool. That precious pause where we say, hmm. What it does is it redirects the entire situation and it brings it inward again. We're living outside, right? We're outsourcing. And it brings everything inward to that version of yourself where you remember you get to choose. We always have a choice. We always have a choice. Bobby says, between heartbeats. Yeah, interesting, right? It's a very, very delicate space, Bobby, right? He says in between heartbeats. I don't know if that's what you're trying to ensue, but sometimes when you're in the heartbeat, that could represent that you're kind of in the emotional attachment to it. It's giving the opportunity for you to take outside storm and make it your internal weather. But we always have these little opportunities, and that's a great way to look at it. I might add that to the mix. And this is the win. This is the win, right? So it's not to shame or blame when we say, but to wake up. That's what we're doing here. And we ask questions like, what's inside of me that's reacting? What inside of me is reacting right now? And what story in my head am I trying to defend? Or what part of me is ready and needing to level up? What an interesting insight to look at yourself when you're in the throes of a reaction, of a knee-jerk stress response system reaction with all the feels, the tightness, the tension, the tunnel vision, and recognize it and pause and say, and ask yourself, what part of me right now is needing to level up? What's my next step? So take note that, although it's extremely powerful, it doesn't stop the attack. That's an important distinction. Just because you say, what it does is it gives you control and it reminds you that you have a choice, but it doesn't stop the attack. What it does is it prevents the identification and participation with the attack. It moves you into the position of the observer rather than the participant. Now, There's advanced forms, advanced levels of flow burglars, and you have to know this. And those are the ones that we call repeat offenders, the ones that like seem to just have it out for you, right? The repeat offenders, the chronic interrupters, and the ones that seem to be on assignment. It's like their whole life has dedicated to making you miserable and stealing your flow. Has anyone here that's listening live, have you ever had someone in your life like that? That you just create this perception that they're there with one sole purpose, and that is to make you miserable and steal your flow. And here's another thing that's interesting to note. Flow burglars almost always share the same origin and story. If you start to, because this is a place of compassion and curiosity that I'm coming from now, because I'm starting to wonder why people are like that. Take myself out of the equation. I'm no longer participating and I'm observing. I'm eating popcorn and watching the movie. Flow burglars almost always come from the same origin if you learn about them in story. Low self worth, right? And it's disguised as righteousness. I've been a flow burglar. I've had times in my life where I had low self worth and I disguised it and packaged it and wrapped it in a package called righteousness. And that's when I was trying to be right because I didn't like myself. And remember, hurt people hurt people. So, what a cool reframe to just say, rather than say, why is this person hurting me? To asking, I wonder why they're hurt. That's the frame. And if you struggle with this, by the way, I understand. It's not easy to let your guard down because we've all been programmed to think that that's what we're supposed to do. But there's a big win on the other side. The juice is well worth the squeeze. So over time, if you practice this, and it takes practice, right? Don't expect it to be perfect the first time. You might still want to defend yourself and all of that. I've been through all of that. But over time, something miraculous happens. The very people who once triggered you all of a sudden become the people who refine your awareness. They almost become, like I said before, teachers. It's interesting. You almost get in this space where you start to recognize that if flow burglars are in your life, you're fortunate, right? And what they're doing is they become kind of like your spiritual gym partners and trainers. They're like your workout buddies that are forcing you to build the muscle of awareness. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me to this place where I am forced to build a very, very important, almost life saving muscle called awareness. And every time you pause to say, haven't made up my mind, that's what it stands for. That's going to be the name of my next book, by the way. Every time you pause to say, what happens is you level up just by committing to saying it. You level up. You graduate to a new level of freedom. Remember, and this is one of our two top tenets that we teach in all of my systems, but in our Make Sense Academy. So I see some of you folks there. Every time we say that, we have to remember this tenet that says that it's who you are that determines how well what you do works. So if you're out there doing a lot of the do, but not seemingly getting ahead and always feeling like you're being distracted or pushed back and, unfortunately having people and things, indicate that the universe does not have any compassion for you, stop focusing on the do and go back and focus on the who. Because if you're always focusing on the do, that's called do-do. So here's the final truth about flow burglars. Flow burglars don't expose your weakness. That's not why they're there. They reveal your opportunities for growth and expansion. Can you see how blessed you are when those kind of people come in? I would never have even come up with this podcast or any of my stuff. The concept of makes sense, the very idea of it, and this book that I just wrote came from me looking at adversity a different way and coming to this place where I go, wait a second, that makes sense. That's the whole premise of the book, and you'll love it. They're there for our growth and expansion. They're opportunistic. And once you stop giving them access and power, the burglary that they're trying to perform, the burglary becomes impossible. Why? because no one can steal what you have finally decided to keep. Nobody can steal something from you if it's unstealable because you've decided to keep it. Make sense? So that is it. This is one of the first times that we've done it in just 30 minutes. So I'm kind of proud of myself. That was one of my goals. So we see Kathy says, it's always me making decisions about a situation. Right. It's so easy for us to forget that we have a choice. So easy. It just happens because remember something. The way the brain works is the lower levels of your brain call the shots. And by the time it gets to the upper level of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, where you actually start thinking, the decision has already been made. And your thinking brain, your conscious, calm thinking brain, thinks that it came up with something and says, oh, this person's a you know what, and they're bad, and I need to defend myself. But that did not come from your own thinking brain. That came from your conditioned brain. So it makes sense that you will come up with this idea of what you should do. And some of you might be thinking that right now, but you can say, you can just ponder and enter that space between your conditioned response and the stimulus that's happening, and just give yourself some time to just think about it in a world that's doing all the thinking for you. So that's it for today. Remember, if you learn something today, give it away because that's the only way it's going to stay. And I'll see you next time. And maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll be here for another live. I'll be in Peru. Love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day. And thank you for sharing this space with me today. Bye bye.